الان ما هماهنگی میکنیم.
At the moment, we are coordinating and holding discussions to ensure those conditions in MOU are fulfilled. I will explain further later. Until those commitments are in place, we will not move on to the remaining provisions at all.
با ایران
Sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz rests with Iran and Oman, and with the arrangements that Iran determines there.
A divine blessing, that is how Iran's chief negotiator is characterizing the conflict, especially given Tehran's strategic power over the Strait of Hormuz. Tehran now says there can be no further talks with the US unless the conditions laid out in the Memorandum of Understanding are met, with Iran pushing for the release of frozen assets. The MOU top of the agenda as an Iranian delegation met Qatar's Prime Minister today in Doha. He met the US side on Tuesday. A source says US and Iranian officials are also having indirect discussions through Qatari and Pakistani mediators, but those are at a lower level. Exactly what is going on in Doha at present? Can you just give us a sort of 1-2 as you see it?
Yeah, so what's really been happening since this MOU was reached between the US and Iran, this MOU, has certain clauses, certain commitments that each side has to make. And the goal is for this MOU to, over 60 days, result in broader negotiations to get a new nuclear deal with Iran. But right now, we've seen it hung up in its own clauses and the implementation commitments of each side. For Iran, the biggest thing, there's these rival interpretations of the MOU. So the MOU explicitly does state that Iran has to make the quote unquote arrangements for transit through Hormuz. Now, the Iranians interpret this as the ships have to go through their designated route through Hormuz, namely through the northern part of the strait, whereas the US has been trying to have ships go through the southern part of the strait. And so this led to the tit for tat strikes we've seen over the weekend, where Iran said that it can't, quote unquote, guarantee the security of ships going through the southern part of the strait. Many ships were passing with their AIS transponders on. A couple of those ships were struck. The US attacked Iran. Iran hit back at US bases in Kuwait and Bahrain. So it's a very volatile situation. But Ghalibaf, the chief Iranian negotiator, to your question, he said, which is the consistent Iranian position, that this new paradigm over Hormuz is their new red line, that this is the critical lever that Iran has, and they want to maintain more control of the Strait of Hormuz after this war, meaning they want ships to pass. They want them, however, to pass through their designated route, and they envision to collect fees. They call them service fees to let these ships pass. Now, the MOU says they can't collect fees for 60 days, but that is its cutoff. Even in the MOU that the US agreed to, it says for 60 days they can't collect fees.
Beyond that, though, we do know that there are continued discussions around what's happening in Lebanon. And right now, what's been happening in Lebanon in recent days is continued Israeli strikes in southern Lebanon. Just yesterday, we saw the Israeli military said that they targeted a Hezbollah operative who was near that security area that the Israeli military is staying in right now, occupying in southern Lebanon. The Israeli Prime Minister has maintained that Israeli troops should have the freedom to operate as they see fit against any potential threats in Lebanon. In fact, just yesterday, he visited Israeli troops in southern Lebanon and told them that if you identify any threat to your safety, quote, act, do not wait, act. We are watching as Iran has continued to maintain that a ceasefire and the withdrawal of Israeli troops in Lebanon is absolutely necessary to maintaining the current U.S.-Iran ceasefire and also to advancing a final deal. But there are now kind of conflicting mechanisms, it seems. On the one hand, the agreement between the Israeli and Lebanese governments, which gives Israel a lot more freedom to act in Lebanon as it sees fit. And on the other hand, this kind of broader language that's included in the Memorandum of Understanding, which Iran has interpreted to mean a total ceasefire and the withdrawal of Israeli troops, which is not happening as of yet.
Iran is pushing for the U.S. to release its frozen assets. The Iranian president tells Iran's news agency that based on the plans made, $6 billion will be returned to the country. Now, U.S. officials say no frozen Iranian assets have been released yet. In a statement Monday, a U.S. official said Iranian assets that are released would be used to purchase American agricultural products to feed the Iranian people.
The $6 billion. This is not the fund. This is not the type of money that would just flow to the Iranian regime or to Iran. The way it works is that they release those funds incrementally to purchase non-sanctionable goods. Remember, there are non-U.S., non-governmental organizations that are involved in these funds. These are not funds that governments are holding. So the private sector is just going to make their own decisions, a risk-based type of approach to these issues. And they're not going to just move these funds in a direction that 2 or 3 years from now, there's a different administration, different policy, or there's another round of escalations with Iran. And these banks are going to find themselves being penalized for having moved those funds. So the funds would be released incrementally, as I've seen being the case, or Qataris can give Iranians a line of credit, and that's what we're hearing from Wally Buff and others in Iran. That would probably give Iranians better leverage if Qataris move forward with something like that, but it would be very unlikely that the U.S. administration is going to agree to a line of credit.
So how do you monitor that and make sure that if the money that is frozen now and ultimately released, it does go to buy, as the U.S. has said, U.S. agricultural products that would go feed the Iranian people? There's a lot of skepticism about this current regime prioritizing their own people as opposed to maintaining their own coffers to support their proxies and continue to fund terrorism around the world.
That's a really good point, and that's a great question. I got to tell you, I've seen little evidence that the Iranian regime is actually interested in using these funds for humanitarian agricultural commodities. They constantly ask for cash or funds that they can then use however they want. And we know, as you said, they're not going to be investing these funds in their economic prosperity of Iranians. They don't put national interest as a priority. It's really the revolutionary ideology that they would invest in first. Now, the way you monitor this is really the private sector compliance programs. Again, these are banks, these are financial institutions that there's a very small portion of their business that is Iran related, and they don't want to risk their 90, 80, 70% of their non-Iran related business over this Iranian fund. So, and historically, they do come to the U.S. government. You've heard from U.S. officials that for these transactions, they do run them by the U.S. government before they release them. But as you said, the reality is, when these funds are released to the non-Iranian companies to send agricultural commodities to Iran, don't be fooled by that. They're not going to be taking those agricultural commodities and throw them in the market. They're going to sell them domestically at higher price, at very high price domestically, and it translate into funds for the regime to spend in other. I don't think I wouldn't oppose to using those funds for agricultural food commodities. Those are exempt from sanctions, not presidential authorities, but legislations that authorize these type of transactions and exempt them from sanctions. But the reality is the Iranian regime is going to receive these shipments and sell them in the domestic market, and not it wouldn't be just kind of a type of commodities that would really help the Iranians right away.